The First World War was a brutal one. Occupants for the war came from all places around the world, and tens of millions died. Gas weapons were used, cities were bombed, and many died from simple things like starvation, and the war changed many aspects of the world when it ended. So gather round and listen as I tell you all about the war, its results, and how the world changed due to it. It all started around the time of the early 1900s, when a couple countries in Europe were a bit angry with each other. France wanted some of their land back from Germany, Germany wanted to take more of everyone's land, and Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire weren't too happy with each other. But it all began in Austria-Hungary, when their Archduke Franz Ferdinand happened to drive around in his car to calm down the Austro-Hungarian people. But things didn't quite go to plan.
It is I, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. I am in my car, driving around. Hello, my people, do not fret, as everything is fine. We have nothing to be worried about. Gah? I was almost assassinated. Oh well, time to go visit the people who were injured, and keep on driving. Wait a minute. I think that man has a...
As you saw, there was an attempt to assassinate the Archduke, first by bomb. But after they missed their detonation and hit the officer's truck behind them, they had to resort to simpler methods of shooting him point blank. So after Franz Ferdinand was shot and died, Austria-Hungary was not very happy, and the first to blame were the Serbians. They talked with Germany and they were in on their idea. But everyone else saw this as a bad idea and opposed their will. This ended up being the spark that ignited the Great War. Germany and Austria-Hungary had ended up calling down upon themselves the combined forces of Russia, France, Serbia, and Great Britain, and what ensued was a truly ruthless and bloody battle of attrition. Later down the line, more countries got involved and people got drafted from all around the world. The war was split into three major fronts: the Western Front, the Eastern Front, and the Southern Front, with the Western Front being the most well-known. This is where the infamous Battle of Verdun took place, and it's also the front that invented trench warfare. The idea of trench warfare was, at its core, a simple game of tug-of-war. On one side there was the enemy, and on another there were the Allies. The two sides would alternate between attacking and defending the trenches to slowly get ground by attacking a trench, overtaking it, and then defending it. But attacking was always harder and more brutal, as you had to run through the no man's land to get to it. No man's land was the area between the trenches, and it consisted of dead bodies, bomb craters, barbed wire, and much more. It was a simple yet deadly form of combat, sometimes resulting in over 60,000 casualties in a single day. The other fronts were simpler, just shooting the enemy and trying not to die. The only real change came from the Southern Front, where it was full-blown desert warfare. After 4 years of this fighting, the war started finally coming to an end. Russia caved in first, as they ran out of all resources to keep fighting. And after America joined the war, the central countries started falling down, one after another. And when Germany gave in, the war was over. But a war of this size has to have some rather big repercussions, right? Well, let's talk about that too now. After the war, all countries involved had some pretty big changes happen. Some lost mountains of money, and others had enormous societal changes. Let's first talk about the materialistic changes that took place. Germany's and Russia's situation ended up being the most dire, the first having to give large reparations and give back all the land they took and some more to their victims, and the latter simply running out of supplies. Russia's entire budget was spent on the war effort, and after it led nowhere for them, the people starved, and the country suffered. Everyone in the world suffered from the war, and nobody got really anything positive out of it. But certain countries were better off than others. America and France made rather quick recoveries. America didn't participate much, so they simply kept their wealth, while France got their money back from Germany. But let's also take a deep dive on the societal changes. People grew very fond of the ideas of democracy and pacifism, as these ideas would keep away another war, and after what they had suffered through, it makes sense to wish for this. If they had a democratic nation, where all the decisions were decided by many people and not by a mad tyrant, they could prevent another war from happening, and if one did happen, perhaps even talk things out. But these ideas didn't work for everyone, as certain countries viewed it differently. Germany wasn't too happy about losing the war, so when their country slowly became a dictatorship, nobody batted an eye. Two other countries who also agreed with the idea of dictatorships were Russia and Italy, the first becoming communistic and the latter becoming fascist. Maybe this new leader could do something differently and help us fix our problems, they thought. But let's also talk a bit about Estonia while we are here. Estonia had some rather massive changes happen to them after the war. When the war ended and Russia was at a monumental low point, we managed to grab our independence from Russia. But our time of joy didn't last long, as Russia soon after planned a counterattack. This led to a defensive war for Estonia. We were no match for the power of Russia, even in the Reagan state. But seeing our troubles, we received help from Great Britain and Finland, helping us change the tides of war. We pushed the enemy out of our borders. The war lasted for a while longer, but in 1919, the war ended and we claimed our independence for good. Today, this is called the Tartu Act. With this, Estonia began its first steps of true evolution. We evolved into an independent, democratic parliamentarian state, but our flourishing hit a speed bump. In 1930, we were hit with the Great Depression, and the people blamed the parliaments. So the new decision was to elect a president who could save us from our troubles. Many rules were changed, and a president was rumored to be elected. One Konstantin Päts was fit for the role. But before they could do so, the Freedom Warriors, also known as the Vabadussõdalased, were rather favored to win the election. So Konstantin Päts and Johan Laidoner led the country into the now known Vaikiv Ajastu. Restrictions were set on the Freedom Warriors. The parliament wasn't allowed to get together, and the elections were postponed. And after a lot of discussion and decisions, Estonia evolved into an authoritarian state. Konstantin Päts was finally elected, and with all the new laws, he gained massive amounts of power. Some people opposed these ideas of authoritarianism, like Jan Dunisson, but all these oppositions were pushed back. And for a while, we stopped having these radical changes. Our society flourished once more, and we started embracing our country. We put heavy emphasis on the pursuit of knowledge and patriotism towards Estonia. Our lives became better, and Estonia rose to a high point where it had never been before. The First World War was scary and dark, but it led to some interesting changes. Countries fully changed their views on the world, and some countries, like Estonia, were allowed to rise up. World War I was often called the Great War, and also the war to end all wars. But as we are going to soon see, this didn't work out too well, and 20 years later a certain someone started rising to power. But that's a talk for another day. That is it for this time. See you next time.